Good morning, afternoon, everybody. Hope you're doing well today. Today is this is the second session of my new my workshop or webinar, becoming a dynamic CRM architect. So thanks everybody for coming. So this is me, Mitch Milam. I'm a dynamic CRM architect. You can reach me at mitch@xrmcoaches.com. My main technical blog is at infinite-x.net, and of course you can reach me on Twitter at Mitch Milam. So feel free to contact me after this if you have any questions. So this is part of my Teaching Tuesdays program, even though today is not Tuesday. I did it because usually I'm busy on Tuesday nights. So I'm having 3 of these sessions today to be able to cover all parts of the globe. So I do on Wednesdays for this one opportunity. So if you go out to tinyurl.teachingtuesdays is a Google moderator site that'll be live for, I think, now to the 15th. That will allow you to give comments about new webinars you would like to see, as well as vote for different things that people have already put in. So that's always a good help for me to be able to figure out what people would like to hear and see. You can always see my recordings. There will be a recording of this put up later today after the 3rd session. I'm recording all 3 and just going to pick the best one and upload that one. But regardless, if you go out to xrmcoaches.com/webinars, you can see my upcoming webinars as well as any of the recordings from the past webinars. So currently for July, I have one on the 7th, which is going to be basic JavaScript debugging. And on the 21st, we're going to talk about contracting, outsourcing, and partnering to work on your Dynamics CRM project. So go out, check those out, sign up if you think that would be of interest to you. Okay, so today's agenda, we're going to talk about Mitch's rules of being an architect, some design considerations, data paths and processes, feature design considerations, typical design decisions that you make, and then I'm going to briefly mention this XRM, keep calling it XRM, the CRM architect class, which is kind of like this information we're going to cover today fully expanded out, so that may be of interest to a few people. So the basic idea behind all of this is kind of notes that I put together over the past few years of the job I do for a living. So the things that I see every day, how I interact with customers, and just kind of the high-level points that I have noticed. And I just did this to kind of give everybody a small path to go down. Okay, if you're wanting to become an architect or increase your dynamic CRM skill set, you need to consider these type of things. So that's what we're going to be doing today. So you want to be a dynamic CRM architect. Where do I start? Well, very simple. Learn everything. And then once you learn everything, then you're an architect. That's it. Okay. So thanks everybody for coming, and we'll talk to you later. Actually, that's not nearly the case, as you can imagine, because rule number 1, if it was easy, everybody would be doing it. Dynamic CRM is not hard by any stretch of the imagination, but there is a lot to it, especially given the later versions and the speed at which they're actually improving the product. So there's a lot to learn, a lot to know, and you just need to kind of be about it. So let's get into the basics. Education. I cannot emphasize this enough. And I'm not actually talking about formal education. So, there are classes that you can get from Microsoft partners, myself included. There's webinars like this one. There's self-study programs. If you're a Microsoft partner or a CRM customer, depending on your level, you can get access to free training there. But education is really just improving your knowledge of an area, not necessarily through classwork, but just through whatever means you find the most comfortable to learn in. The next thing is understanding. You really and truly need to understand how the product works and what it does. And again, since everything is growing at an alarming, astounding rate, sometimes understanding how the pieces work is a little bit more difficult today than it was, say, 3 years ago. The next thing is practice. Nothing will ever beat practice. So if you can create a CRM instance that allows you to play around without causing any undue harm to anyone else, that's the best thing. And after that, what I would do is I would practice and practice some more, and then maybe after that I would practice some more. That's how you learn things, is by doing. I think that's just about everybody. A lot of people will pick things up in class or through some kind of study program, or even learning it, reading blogs and things like that. But nothing will ever beat you actually going and doing it. I'm not sure if everybody has read this book by Malcolm Gladwell called Outliers. It's got a very interesting postulation in it where he states that through research he's found that there's an average of an individual being considered an expert in their field by applying 10,000 hours of practice to get there. And he uses several musicians, Bill Gates, for instance, and things like people like that. And what that's all about is you put 10,000 hours into whatever craft you're working with. So it could be like Bill doing, computer programming or various musicians and things like that. That's several years worth of work. Okay. The more you do that, the better you get. And the better you get, the easier things are. So a lot of times when people like, especially my family, like, oh, how did you learn that? Like, well, I just went and did it. And I did it again, and I did it again. And the more you do, the better you get at it. So, again, practice does indeed make perfect. So with Dynamics CRM, again, the biggest thing that you have to worry about is product knowledge. You need to know and understand the product and its capabilities. What's interesting about some of the later revisions of CRM is I constantly find myself not really knowing that what it does sometimes, because what will happen is you will actually know something, and then they will make a change, and then you find that you do not know something. So they'll change a feature, and it would work one way, one version, and a different way, another version. And that could be a major version, such as going from, say, 2011 to 2013 to 2015, or it could be a minor version. Maybe one of the update roll-ups fixed something or broke something in some cases. So I can't really tell you how many times I've actually told someone this is the way something works, only to find out that there was a change that nobody told me about or I didn't find out about, and it didn't work that way anymore. So that does happen, and it's just something you kind of be aware of. But if you don't know what you don't know, that's a very dangerous situation, because there's a lot going on, and this is just anything. It doesn't really, apply to Microsoft CRM, specifically. But know what you don't know. So if you have an area that you know that is not complete, then you need to do something to find out how to complete that area. When you don't know something, you really need to know where to find help to get it. Okay? There are tons of great resources out there these days. The MVP community that I'm a part of has just got some wonderful people in it that write very detailed blog posts. There's now podcasts, all kinds of good information. Today is July 1st, which is one of the quarterly renewal or addition dates for CRM MVP. So I was checking my email, and a lot of MVPs got renewed today that were in their, say, third, fourth, fifth, sixth year. So really, really good to hear. But anyway, so the resources that we have available to us today is much better than it was even 5 years ago. So lots of great information. When you hit a stumbling block, you can do a quick search, and in most cases find someone who has the answer already written for you. So that's always good. But know where to go to find the help when you need it. Rule number two, find the best answer, not the right answer. One of the things that I absolutely positively love about Dynamics CRM is there's almost always multiple ways to do anything. So that could be as simple as one technology versus the other, or it could be just one configuration versus another configuration. It really depends. What you as an architect are trying to get to the bottom of is what is the best answer. If I have a problem and I do research, and okay, now I have 5 different answers, all of which are right, but one is more right than the other, more correct than the other one. It's your job to determine which one is the best answer. And again, there are right and wrong answers, but in most cases you have several right answers or several correct answers, but one will be more correct than the other one given all of the circumstances combined. So that's your job to figure that question out. So when it comes to the basic Dynamics CRM features, we have configuration, which is, just done through the user interface. Then we have customization. So biggest thing that you can do as an architect is learn the when, the why, and the where to use one over the other. So a lot of times we can configure a solution, and when that doesn't work, we can customize a solution. And there's actually a third thing we'll get into in a minute where we actually develop a solution. So you have to understand how these things actually fit together. so that you don't go and start developing a solution that's already built in. I cannot tell you how many times I've actually worked on systems where the person who actually started the work had a product knowledge deficiency and they went straight to development. And I walk in, I'm like, well, that feature's over here already done, right? And they didn't, because they just never looked there. So always know when to configure, to customize, or develop, and know when you would use one versus the other. The other thing that is kind of coming into play, especially the past couple of years, is we're not just working in the CRM world anymore. We have Microsoft Social Listening, which has been renamed to Microsoft Social Engagement. We have Dynamics Marketing, which is a totally standalone package that integrates with Dynamics CRM via connector. And then finally, we have the mobile world. So we've always had the mobile website, but now we actually have mobile apps. And that could be the third-party apps that are available, or just the built-in apps that are run on mobile or tablet devices. So it's not just people sitting down in front of Outlook or in front of their web browser and doing work. It's growing everywhere. So these all make things much more complicated than we used to have. So just something to keep in mind. So let's start talking about the technologies that we're going to be working on. So the client technologies that we generally have available to us are HTML web pages and JavaScript. Since Dynamics CRM is a website, knowledge of when to apply custom web pages is paramount to the design of certain systems. And usually we get into those when we kind of move past the bounds of what the user interface does for us. So HTML is still the commonality amongst all the platforms. We still can use Silverlight if we're working in a web world with just on the web browser itself, not associated with a mobile device. So HTML will work across everything. So it works on web, on mobile, etc. And JavaScript is what actually makes most of that work for us. Some CRM-specific technologies that we work with on the client are the sitemap, which is the navigation, the ribbon. The ribbon's still there, even though it's mostly called the command bar, and the command bar is what we use on the forms and things. Then we have business process flows on some entities, and then we have business rules, which is a way to create programming logic without actually having to write programming code, JavaScript. I actually did a webinar about this a couple weeks ago. That's already on YouTube if you want to take a look at that. So these are all the things that you need to kind of understand how they work and how they work with each other. So the general server technologies that we work with, SQL Server being the top of the list because, as you know, just about everything within Dynamics CRM is inside the SQL Server. We have SharePoint associated for documents, and then we have SQL Server reporting services for the built-in and custom reports that you might want to work with. The specific CRM server technologies are things such as workflows, the Dynamics CRM web services, which allow us to write applications against Dynamics CRM, either third-party type of things or plugins or custom workflow activities. All of these things are running on the server itself or accessed via the server. So you need to understand how they actually function, what runs them, what context they exist in related to the CRM system overall, and then how to make everything function together is the biggest thing. Rule number 3, which I probably should kind of move around and call it rule number 1, technology absolutely does not fix process issues. If anybody's ever seen this happen, you need to email me and let me know the case because you would be a perfect case study. 90% of the time or more, the process is what you're actually fixing, not the technology. You fix the process issue, you apply technology against the new process, you make the process work better. I can't tell you how many times I've come into a situation where, you ask the customer, what is your process? Well, we don't have one. Okay, so it's now your job to fix one. Or they'll actually say to you, we don't have one, we want you to tell us what our process is. Okay, that's kind of a scary proposition because in many cases that's really not what you're there for. But that happens all the time. So you have to fix the processes, you have to make sure that they're well documented, that they actually function as the business needs, and then you can apply technology to make those processes work better. That's the idea. If you just start throwing technology at a problem, you're probably not going to fix it, and in all likelihood, you're going to make it worse. So data paths and processes. This is very, very important when you get into systems that start integrating with each other, or even just the way that things work within the CRM itself. So you need to know and understand the data paths. Where does the data enter the system? Where does it stop along the way? And where does it finally end up? So data entry into the system can be literally from anywhere. So you can enter via keyboard, just the plain old data entry we've always been doing. We can pull it from legacy applications. Say we have something where we have an integration point with GP where we pull data in, or via third-party product. Like for instance, everyone on this call is now inside of my system because I use GoToWebinar. I also have Click Dimensions for email marketing. They have a connector for GoToMeeting or GoToWebinar. So when you register, your information will be extracted from GoToWebinar, added to CRM, and therefore I can send you an email at the end of this webinar saying, hey, thanks for coming, here's some notes. Okay, that got into the system. I didn't have to do anything besides set the connector up and make sure that everything was working. Okay, so how data enters the system can be extremely important depending on your situation. Where does data stop along the way? Does it stay within Dynamics CRM or does it change entities? When I say, does it stay within CRM, does it only stay within CRM? Like I don't have any kind of accounting system that's connected to CRM, but I have an accounting system, but I don't need to send anything from my accounting system over to CRM or vice versa. But I have many customers who have GP, for instance. So they have a connector of some type that moves data from CRM into GP and vice versa. Okay, so is it only going to stay within CRM or is it going to move outside the system? Are we changing entities? So for instance, example we'll get into is lead. If you have a lead and you qualify that into an account contact opportunity, that's changing an entity. So things like this. So you need to know where the data goes through the system, or does it just stay in one place? And finally, where does it actually end up? Like for you guys, your contacts, that's all you're ever going to be. I use contact for everything. So when someone's added to the system, I actually have a relationship type, or the customer type code as they call it, set to prospect. So if you purchase something from me or I've done work with you, you're a customer. If you just sign up for a webinar and we communicate like that, in most cases, you're a prospect. Okay? So that's the end of the story right there. So, but if I was working with leads where I would get leads, put leads into the system, and then move them over to an account/contact at a later time, that is, the path, and that's probably where it's going to end up. Like I mentioned, the GP connection. Am I going to move the data from CRM into GP or vice versa? So most of the time you get data inside CRM, it stays inside CRM. But these days, again, everything can go outside the system. It can be put to GP. We can connect things to Dynamics CRM marketing. We can pull things from Dynamics social listening or engagement, things like that. So always keep these things in mind. So the example I was mentioning here, our lead conversion, we start off with a lead, and if it's qualified, we actually will convert that into an account, a contact, and an opportunity. Then we have to do something with it. So that's an example of moving between entities. A more kind of famous one is the quote order invoice system. So you start off with a quote, you take an order, and then you convert that into an invoice. So if you have a connection to an accounting system like GP, at some point you may actually have GP do the work and push the data back into CRM. For instance, you convert a quote to an order within CRM, your connector picks that up, pushes it over into GP, which generates an invoice, which pushes the invoice back into CRM. Okay, so that's a path that actually can happen. So it's very important for you to understand and know these things. The last example here is very similar to the GoToWebinar one I mentioned. So you have a prospect that comes to your website and said, hey, could you please email me about this product or this service you have? And that gets put into Dynamics CRM. So again, I use Click Dimensions for this, but there are a variety of other third parties out there, either free or you pay. And the amount of time that this can save a company is sometimes staggering, because what happens at minimum when you fill out a contact me page on your website is it sends an email. Then a person has to take that email and has to create a new contact or a lead within CRM and has to populate that information. Then they have to go and send that information to a salesperson, for instance, and do all these things. It could take 5 or 10 minutes for that process to happen. But what if you took one of the technologies, as I mentioned, you put it in place, you replace the contact us page with a lead page that put data directly into CRM. You had a workflow that was designed to look at the information entered and automatically assign it to a person. You could automatically reply back to the person saying, hey, thanks for your note. Somebody will be contacting you soon. You could send an email to the new owner saying, hey, a lead just got assigned to you off the website. Here's what they said. All of that can save time, which saves money. And this one example is, I think, the best integration example that CRM has about the amount of time and money that can be saved while also fulfilling the need to contact a customer and stay in contact. Rule number 4, it is not as important to be able to do everything, but it is important to know how it is done. So I get into this all the time. So I primarily focus on architecture and development. So I still write a good share of my plugins and do JavaScript and things like that. There are other architects who don't do that. They stay at the architect level, and that really depends on their job function, who they work for, etc. So the idea here is, as you are growing in knowledge of how Dynamics CRM works on your path to becoming an architect, you don't need to know how to do everything. If you're not a developer, that's fine, but you need to know what developers do. So if you're asking a developer to write a plugin, you need to know what that process is. So you need to know the tools they use. You need to know how it's tested, how it's put into production, all these things. So again, it's not necessarily you need to know how to do it, but you need to know how it's done. So that is just, I hate to say it's common sense, because you can tell the people who don't know how to do something because they ask you to do something that can't be done a lot of times. Okay? So if anybody has anything to share on that, then hey, leave me a note here, and we'll talk about it here in just a minute. So let's talk about feature design considerations. So the first is going to be environmental. Now, this is not as bad a case in the current environment with CRM 2015, 2013 as it used to be, but there are still differences. So there are some things that you can do with on-premise that you physically cannot do with online. Some of those can be mitigated by having a partner host your CRM system for you, so that you're not kind of held to the restrictions that the Dynamics CRM Online team make you go through. It really kind of depends. Likewise, with CRM Online, they are now releasing updates to CRM Online first and on-premise second. That technically gives us 2 different versions that are running at the same time. So the feature set of the spring update, which is update 1 for Dynamics CRM Online 2015, is not the same as the 0.1 update of on-premise. Those are 2 different things. So you have to understand the differences. So for instance, the 0.1 update is still the same interface. The spring update on CRM Online has a different interface. So that's something to consider when you're doing work. Okay? And partner hosted is really a variation of on-premise, but they're going to have restrictions because it's a shared environment. They're going to have restrictions just like the CRM Online folks would have, but they may be less strict about doing things. And if you have a good relationship with them, maybe you can do things better with a partner hosted than you can with CRM Online. It really kind of depends. So regardless, you kind of need to understand the requirements and restrictions of each type of environment. So when you start developing the actual solution, one of the biggest things that we ask is, when does this need to happen? So we call that term immediacy. So if it needs to happen immediately when a user performs an action, in general terms, that's going to be a piece of JavaScript, because JavaScript runs on the client when the form is open, and when the user does something, like if you have a calculation to add fields up, when you type a value into a field, the total is updated. When you type a value into another field, the total is updated. If that has to be done like that, that is JavaScript, and that's just the only way it works. If the user can wait for the save button to be pressed and the calculation to be performed, we can actually put that into a plugin. Okay? If we have outside applications, such again as GP, or if we have a customer portal that's on the internet that pulls data from CRM and displays it on the portal that they can modify or at least view. If we push data from that into CRM, do we have to have our code to be executed in that manner? Okay. If we have to have the last two, if those could be true, then we need to write a plugin, and this allows us to actually perform this calculation that we were discussing the same no matter where the data came from. The only problem is the immediacy is kind of lost because the user has to save the record before it's refreshed on the screen. Now, that being said, I've actually done this, the same thing with JavaScript and a plugin for a customer. So they wanted the immediacy of seeing the calculation happen live, but they always wanted to make sure that it happened behind the scenes no matter where the data came from. So in this case, I had JavaScript to do the calculation live and a plugin to do it when they save the record. So it always kept it up to date no matter where the data came from. So an on-demand application. So this is more speaking toward the plugin model. So the plugins work behind the scenes, and so do workflows work behind the scenes. The biggest question is, when you create the solution, does it need to happen every single time somebody does something? If you create an account, does it need to execute? If you update an account, does it need to execute? Or is there ever going to be a point in time where a user needs to make a decision about doing it right then? Okay. If it needs to happen every time, that's a plugin. Plugins are configured to run on a specific entity when a specific, what they call, message is executed. So they go, again, could be create, could be update. You cannot turn that off for specific transactions. You can turn it off or disable it, but that's it. And it disables it for, until you turn it back on again. If you need to be able to execute the code on demand, what you do is you take your plugin, you create a custom workflow activity, add that to the system, and then execute that custom workflow activity using a workflow that you've set to be on demand. And all that means is when you select the records and click the workflow button, it shows up in the list of workflows to run. You run the workflow against the record, and whatever code you have executed or you inside your custom workflow activity gets executed. Okay, so sometimes plugins work just fine, but sometimes you have to be able to execute stuff manually. And if it's still going to be manual, it has to be a custom workflow activity, which means you have to have it in a workflow. Okay, so let's talk about some typical design decisions we run into. The age-old question with technology and software is, do we buy it or do we build it? Can we build it or should we buy it, are the actual two questions. So realistically, either one of these things will work depending on your organization. In some cases, it's actually better to build it yourself because you just have better control over the entire situation. In some other cases, what you run into is you don't have the personnel to build something, or the cost to build it would far outweigh the cost to purchase something already packaged up. So the main thing there is it's going to cost X amount of dollars to purchase this piece of software to add into CRM. How much time and money would it cost us to do it ourselves? And then the fact is, any software you develop, you have to maintain. And a lot of people don't figure that into their calculation, but that's absolutely the way it works. So always build in your maintenance costs into your development costs, and that allows you to figure out if it's permissible for you to build something versus buy. Personally, even though I do a lot of development, I would rather purchase a package for a customer if it's cost effective. That's because that's less code we have to write, less code we have to maintain. Somebody else can maintain it, and it's less overhead. So the development process that you actually go through is going to really dictate how your architecture process is going to be handled. So the traditional way of developing things is called waterfall. So the waterfall technique is you talk to your customer, you develop a set of specifications, you write those specifications up, you get them approved, you hand it to the development team, and 2 years later you come out with a product. The problem that people were running into is it was 2 years later, and the problem was the business had moved on. And the business that you wrote the application for wasn't the one using the software anymore. So you had to go back and make changes, and it basically costs a lot of time and money to re-engineer these things. So a few years ago, the phrase agile development became popular. Agile is just an iterative development form. So what you do is you develop a list of things you want to do. You divide those up into what they call sprints, which are say from 1 to 4 to 6 week time frames, or depends on the organization and what you're trying to accomplish. You divide the work up into these smaller chunks. You develop the chunks. You put them into testing. You get them tested. You get them approved. You roll them into production. And you start working on the next chunk. And you do this until pretty much you're done. And this allows you to show the users constant improvement. So every period of time, every month, you're giving the user a new feature, or you're fixing some things, or whatever it might be. But you're always showing continual progress, and that makes people feel better because it doesn't seem like the guys are working in the back room, and it'll come out next year, and it will be slow and won't be what we asked for. So the problem with Agile sometimes is the fact that a lot of people think you can't work off a specification. You just go and do it, and that leads to budgeting issues and a bunch of other stuff. And all this is kind of untrue. You still have a development process you need to follow. You can spec things out of how long things will take, and you can still do it, but you can do it in a smaller set of phases rather than one huge phase. And there are some funny ones down at the bottom. They do Agile, but they do some waterfall on the side, or they use Scrum, which is another Agile technique. And they use Scrum, but we actually use waterfall too, so they call that Scrummerfall. So these are kind of marriages that are probably not meant to be, but people do them anyway. So the next big thing to ask is, what is your team that you're working with? What resources are available? What is their skill level? What is the budget for the external assistance you might need? This is one of the things that I think a lot of people kind of underestimate. Is you have a group of people working on stuff, and sometimes, believe it or not, the consultant, maybe you are the group of people. But having resources available to do specific tasks really does help you do stuff. So what I like to see is, okay, a list of here are the people working on the project, here's their skill set, and then that way you can kind of tell what kind of people you have working now versus what type of people you need to bring on to finish the project. And again, it's going to depend 100% on the project, on the customer, on the company, if you're working for a consulting company, on who's doing what. But the idea here is you start with what you have. You try to get as much done as what you have, and when you reach a point where you're at a skill level, either you grow somebody of that skill level, or you hire somebody like a consultant to finish out your team. Which brings me to rule number 5. Throwing developers at a problem is seldom the answer. If anybody has ever been through some of the stuff we went back in the 80s, IBM used to have what they called the human wave approach to development. So they would throw waves and waves of people at a problem until they basically overwhelmed the problem with people. That generally doesn't work, because throwing people at a problem has a tendency to make things worse because your communication abilities drop. And there's an old thing back in the 80s where one of the early developers said that he would never have a team that was larger than he could fit into a VW Beetle to go for pizza, which is about 4 if they're small. So the idea there is, when you have a smaller team, you can actually, in most cases, get things done better and at a higher quality rate than if you have a large group of people. And there's plenty of examples if you want to look on the internet. OS2 that Microsoft and IBM worked on was a perfect example of that. DBase 4 from back in the day had basically a plane load of people versus 5 or 6 people that worked on DBase 3. Things like that. Most of the time, these things are ginormous failures, and yours could be too. So the idea here is you need to apply developers smartly, not thinking that the more people you throw on the problem, the faster it'll get done. That's generally not the way it works. So let's look at some design scenarios we might run into. And on this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to read the scenario to you, and then if you think that you have the answer for this, just on your GoToWebinar control panel, just click the raise hand button, and that'll raise your hand, and I'll open your mic up, and you can tell me what it is. So the first thing we're going to work with is automatic numbering. So your customer needs to automatically assign a unique number to when a new account or a contact is created. So who has an idea about how you might do that? Anybody? Surely somebody has got an idea about how this would be done. Oh, Rob Harrison, you're the first one to actually raise your hand. Okay, Rob, you're live.
Plugin?
A plug-in, that would work. Anything else?
I wouldn't begin to know how to do it with JavaScript, if that's even possible. Or I can't think how you would do it with a workflow either.
Okay, that's good. Thanks, Rob. Kylie also says plug-in. Chitra says real-time workflows. That's good. Tyler, you're on. What do you think? Tyler, you hear me? You talk? Oh, Tyler can't talk. Okay, John?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
All right. There's a couple of different ways you can do it. Um, you can go to the CRM store and download a chunk of JavaScript to put in there to generate a code and put it in the field. You could grab the GUID and use a piece of that, the GUID of the record. So there's a couple of ways to do it, as well as the plugin and some of the other ones mentioned.
Gotcha. Very good. Okay. So the ones that I've come up with or have actually physically done, so as Rob and several other people mentioned, a plugin. So your plugin can generate the number either by having a table of IDs that you increment one, you update the table back. You can run a stored procedure in SQL if you're in on-premise. You can run a workflow that calls the same kind of code, either synchronously or asynchronously. Most of the time, async won't work because you needed the immediacy to happen because it happens right then. Maybe your GP system, like I've got a customer who they create a contact to get shoved over to GP, which gives it the account number, which pushes the account number back into CRM. You can create a web service. I've actually done it where I have a piece of JavaScript which calls a web service, which runs a SQL stored procedure, which increments the number, gives me the new number, and then passes that back. So all of these are viable depending on the situation. 99% of the time, throughput is the issue. If you have a very high frequency update process or a large number of records being created, then the manner that you create the number is going to be 100% dependent on that fact. Strictly because if you're not fast enough, what you will end up with is a duplicate numbers. Okay, we don't want that. Eric asked, did you say run a SQL store procedure? Yes, I did, and it is supported. You put it in a different database, and basically you call it from that. Again, only on-premise, but yes, that's 100% supported. So what Eric is referring to is you're not supposed to do too terribly many things with the database, like add database level features besides indexes. That's the only official thing that they support you doing. But what you do is you create a different database, you put your integration stuff in that database, and then you call that database, which refers back to the CRM database, and you can do a select with a max operator and pull things out, or you can have a counter entity in the integration database that keeps track of, like, my current counter for a contact is 105, so I'll go increment that and hand the ID back. Okay. Chitra says Azure Service Generate, that works too. That's a new thing that we need to put in there. So yes, you can create actually you can create a plugin that actually runs within Azure. So that's another one. So again, these are all great things, and they're all viable. And I've done actually all of them except for the Azure one, quite honestly. But they're all available and perfectly normal to use depending on the situation. But again, it's testing, and the issue in this specific case you'll run into again is throughput. Because what happens is if you don't do your thing fast enough, or you don't lock things down properly, what will end up happening is you end up with duplicate IDs, which just causes problems. Okay, so again, testing is your friend here. Okay, very good. Let's try another one. So this is kind of a weird one. In some cases, this may not apply anymore, but it really kind of depends on the situation. So in this case, your company needs to automatically share an account among a group of sales representatives. the life experience I got this off of is I had a customer who had inside sales reps and outside sales reps. The outside sales reps owned the account. The other outside sales reps could not see that account. The inside sales reps could only see accounts that they had been shared with. So what we did, and there were 2 inside sales reps per account. What we did was put in a facility where the anytime an account was created or updated, the inside sales reps for the specific outside sales reps could always see the accounts that the outside sales rep owned. So how would you guys do this? Okay, Nathan, you're up.
I would create an access team and add the inside and outside sales reps to that.
Okay, that's great. So that started with 2013. So what Nathan's talking about is creating an access team, have the access team on the record, and then all 3 of those people are part of that. That is absolutely an option. So Mayank, you want to tell us what your option is? Hope your name. Mayank, you want to say?
Hello. Can you hear me? Hello?
Yeah, a little bit. Go ahead.
Yes. We could do it through plugin. So when the plugin runs or when the account gets updated, or we can share the record with relevant team members. The other way to do it is custom workflow. Even the custom workflow can run and share the records with relevant team members. You could do it with JavaScript as well. So have a button on the form which updates the record, and that when you update the record, goes either runs the workflow or runs the plugin and shares the relevant records. So you could do it either ways.
Okay, very good. Okay, so that pretty much covers everything. So you can use the built-in access teams to do stuff, or you can drop back to the standard sharing. One advantage that the standard sharing has over that is you still have a singular owner, which is the outside account rep, and then you can define the level of share that the inside reps have, which is really not available to the access team. So you could actually use a combination of those. So either one of those processes would work, given the extremely specific circumstances for that customer. Okay, so this is a type of thing where prior to CRM 2013, our only option was to create some type of plugin, either a custom workflow activity or a standard plugin to do this. Okay, so that was the only thing we could do. With the new technology they added for access teams in 2013, we got a new way to do things. So did that still apply? Maybe. Okay, but again, this is part of your job as architect, is to look at all the points here and then figure out, okay, we have 2 specific options. One's out of the box. One has to require some custom code. Here are the advantages and disadvantages to both. That's what you're doing for a living here. Make sense? Okay. Here's another one. So we need a top customers report, and the CEO would like on her desk at the beginning of each month to have the top 25 customers by revenue. So how would you do this? Okay. Manik, you want to try it again?
Hello. Yeah. We could write a report which runs every month. We can schedule a report to run every month, which will display the top 25 customers. But that's still a manual. What we could do is we could, from the SQL server, we can send that report out to a particular CEO as an email as well.
Gotcha. Very good. Okay. Let's see. Eric chimed in with Dynamic Excel Pivot. Chitra said roll up with chart. Okay. So this is actually a trick question. Let me show you the trick here. I said, trick highlighter. I said report. Then I said would like a list. Okay. A list and a report are 2 different things. So if you look at what a definition of a report is, and I actually did a presentation about this a couple years ago at the CRM. A report can be whatever you think it is. It can actually be a SQL Server report. It can also be an Excel worksheet. It can be a chart. It can be a view of data within CRM, either a personal view or a system view. It can be any of these things. So specifically, what the CEO said was, I would like a list of the top 25 customers by revenue at the beginning of each month. Okay? Now, I told you two different things, and everybody or most everybody picked up on the word report. That's not what she said. She said she would like a list. And then we interpreted report because we saw the word report. So the most proper answer in this specific case is not to do anything new, actually, besides create a view of the data, create a chart that goes onto her dashboard, and that's what she sees. And that way it's live at the first of the month, the middle of the month, and the end of the month. And then she can drill down into that chart using the standard dashboard technology that's built into Dynamics CRM. Okay? That's actually the most proper way to do it. Again, all of these are absolutely 100% correct answers, except for the fact that a dashboard chart is the most correct given the technologies we have available and what the CEO would like. Okay? So just because a customer tells you one thing doesn't mean that's actually what they want. Okay? I'm sure that you haven't actually had anybody ever tell you they wanted one thing and brought up something else. And Eric brings up the fact that who says she can have access to CRM? Well, she's a CEO, Eric, and I know you're now a Microsoft employee, so I know you don't want the brass looking at your CRM system, but that's what happens. Okay, so this is a perfect example of something that you can do within CRM that takes a minimal effort. What would this take? 20 minutes? If you were slow. Okay, so yeah, not a huge deal at all. But this would provide immediate value and make you look like a rock star because you gave your CEO something she made top of her list. I need to know this information, and the thing that separates you from the other people is you actually dug down into what does she really want. Now, she just really wants to see this like pretty graph. Yeah, a report would be nice, but now I can show this to her. Okay, so that's where you actually make yourself known. Okay. So rule number 6, and this is kind of strange, and it really and truly only applies to hopefully consulting organizations, but there is a chance in time or place in time where you and your customer do not fit at all, and you cannot fit a square peg into a round hole. And I know that sounds really weird, but yeah, I'm sure you've probably by now everybody's heard the term firing your customer. If you get into a situation where it's a lose-lose for everybody, you need to find a way around it and get out. Okay, and I bring this up because I am a consultant. I do work with companies all over the world, and sometimes customers are just not a good fit. And the sooner that you can figure this out, the better off everybody is. Okay, so does anybody have any questions? So what we can do, you can either ask them in the question window or put your hand up, and I can let you ask them with your voice. So what do you have? Anybody? Okay, Rob, hang on. Okay, Rob, you're live.
Where would you suggest starting to learn about plugins? It's something that I call upon developers to do, but it's all really magic to me, and I'd like to start getting some understanding of what's really happening.
Well, if I would ever get off my butt and actually finish it, I have a plugin book half written. Okay.
Until that is published.
Until that is done. Okay. So you can always start with the SDK. So the CRM's documentation team has got to be the best documentation team I have ever worked with. Okay.
Really?
Yeah, they are really on the ball. So you download the SDK from the Microsoft.com downloads. It installs code samples, a help file, all tools that we use, Excel worksheets of data, and if what I do is I have the help file open just about every single day. If you ever get into a situation where you see incorrect or unclear data, at the bottom of every single topic is a link that says send feedback, and when you click on that, it opens an email with this coded subject. You type in what you want, and 90% of the time they get back to you within a few days, if not a day or so.
Okay.
So I use it exclusively if they're a bit unclear on stuff, or I find it online, or maybe they have a topic that's kind of duplicated, but the information is not in sync. I send it to them, or if I find like, okay, hey, you're missing this piece. If I happen to have that piece, I'll go ahead and send it. Say, hey, you need to add this to it, and they're really good about that stuff. But they've got some really good examples. The SDK, and I only use the help file because it's version specific. When you search on MSDN, you're going to find the help for all versions, which can be misleading. Okay. So start there, and then there's lots of blogs, like I mentioned, lots of blogs and stuff out there, stuff on mine, a bunch of the others that kind of tell you how plugins actually work and stuff.
Thanks.
You bet. Okay, Mayank, you've tried again. What's going on? What's your question?
Yes. One of the things I've been doing senior development for an architect role. One of the things that I find challenging is the estimate. So estimating the dynamics work is always a challenge. I don't know how you guys deal with this.
Well, if anybody else on the call has an answer to that, now's the time to make your $1 million, because that is the question. That is always the question. So it's really hard to estimate things if you don't know the people you're working with. And the reason that's a problem is because everybody is going to be working at a different speed. Like I've got a friend of mine that I work with on a lot of projects, and he and I have worked together a long time. I know pretty much how long he takes to do stuff and vice versa. So if I quote out something that's me and him, I know I'm going to be correct because I know how I work, I know how he works. But when I'm working with other people, like I was working on a project, and they were recreating a piece of functionality that me and this other guy had done at another company, and they had one of their developers assigned to it. It took us a day and a half to do it at the other customer, and this guy turned it into a full-time career. He worked on it for like 3 months. So
that's the problem. When I work with the team, which are new members, and I think it will take few days, but it comes out and it takes weeks for other people to do it.
Yeah, the only way you're really going to get past that is experience with that specific people, a group of people, or team. So you're going to just have to, say, okay, this is what and this is kind of your internal notes to yourself. This is what they told me this time, and then this is what it actually took, and just kind of keep a record of that. There's a story from way back in the day where this one guy was always on time and under budget, and nobody could figure out why. So finally, the boss asked him, was like, "Well, every time they tell me something, I multiply it by 3, and that's my answer." So sometimes it's like that. You have this factor because developers are notorious for underestimating how long something's going to happen. Okay, so it's just a fact of life. Okay, so when you get into these things, it's really something you're going to have to just kind of work through. And unfortunately, there's no right or wrong answer to this. Every place is going to be different. Some people are going to be faster. Some people are going to be slower. It's generally an experience level. So more experienced developers will generally work faster than less experienced developers because they know how to solve the problem. Whereas people who haven't done the work tend to take longer because they're kind of fumbling around, and they don't understand where things are or the ramifications of some things. So again, unfortunately, there's not a silver bullet answer to this. Like I said, if you come up with one, you'll be the first trillionaire on the planet because everybody has that question. So sorry we couldn't do anything good for you. Okay, Nathan, what's your question?
Mitch, a little bit of a different tack, but I was wondering if you could just explain your role as an architect versus like a consultant when you're on a project.
Okay. In my role, it's kind of this. It's kind of a similar thing. So what I can do, and it really truly depends on the customer. I can come in at a high level and just help them design the overall scope of the project. So okay, here's what the goal of the project is, and then we have to define the pieces that make up the project, who's going to work on everything, what the time frame is going to be, what our testing matrix is going to look like, the overall big picture stuff. whereas a consultant will come in and actually start doing work. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So sometimes I try to stay at the high level where I'm only giving, advice and direction, because and I said, it's great you brought this up. Sometimes when you're at the architect level, if you start doing the work, you stop being the architect.
Yep.
Does that help?
Yep, very much so. Thank you.
You bet. Anyone else? No? Okay. So I have this architect class, and so what I did is I was trying to figure out how I could do this type of thing where I could stretch it over a period of time to where you could actually get some work done. And what I came up with was a six-week class that we met twice a week for 2 hours each time. And the last class we did was last fall, and we met for 6 weeks on Tuesday and Thursday morning from 8 to 10. And what we do in those sessions is the first one we talk about the tools, and then we go through these feature-based scenarios where we just kind of take the stuff like we talked about, like with the auto number and the chart and thing, and we look at those things and we discuss amongst us how to do those things and try to build up some knowledge. Okay, here is a scenario. How would we fix this? Or how would we solve the problem we've been presented? And at the end, we have a couple case studies where we have two extremely opposed businesses. One is actually a personal concierge service. The other is an oil and gas exploratory company. And how would we use CRM to run those businesses? And then what we do with that is we actually kind of design out, okay, here are the components we're actually going to apply to the solution. Here's the pieces we're not going to apply to the solution given the context. And then what we do is we actually kind of come up with a list of here are the things we're going to work on. Here's how we would do it. We don't actually get into actually doing the work, but again, this is architecture, so this is all high level. So if you're interested in this, I don't even have a time frame on it. It'll probably be this fall sometime. But if you go out to tinyurl.com/CRM Architect class, you can sign up. And I'll ask you some about your experience and what time of day you would like this in. Again, you have to commit to being there, because if you're not there, I mean, you might lose some things. So it is a pretty heavy commitment. And so anyway, if you are interested, then go ahead and submit your thing, and then I'll kind of work through with everybody who's talked about it over the next month or so, and figure out if we have enough interest for a class, and then if so, how it will actually happen. Okay. Any other questions before we go? Nathan, let me work on the cost on that. Last time it was right around $2,500 US, so it'll probably be close to the same this time. So, any other questions? Okay, Tyler brought up the other thing that happens to us. So how would you handle a situation where a customer keeps adding requirements to a particular phase of a project? It's called a change request. Change requests have ramifications. They have a budget number and they have an approval process. If you're working on so I've actually had the good fortune to work on several places who didn't actually have a budget, believe it or not. We just worked. And those are really cool. But I've worked in other places where they have a very strict budget. So what you do is you actually have to define the process for change. So you agree on what we're going to work on. If they change that, then they have to acknowledge, and the people in charge have to acknowledge that that change is going to, one, delay the project, and two, cost more money. And you have to have that signed. So that's how you deal with that. Anybody else? Nope. Okay. Well, thanks everybody. At the end of the day, I'm recording all three of these sessions, so I'm going to put one up. I'm just going to figure out which one is the best, and then I'll put that up on the YouTube channel, and then I'll send a link out to everybody later tonight. So again, thank you so much for coming, and if you got any questions, drop me a line. Thanks a lot. We'll see you.